everyone, it's Mike Young, lifestyle nutritionist with aPlantBasedDiet.org. Welcome to chapter 92 on the blue zones of longevity. This is the book, of course, you can see behind me, Live to 150, and the blue zones of longevity. I'm adding that last part. If you don't know about them, I'm going to tell you about them. If you do, well, I'm also going to give you some insight that you may not have heard before. First of all, I want you guys to know that our nonprofit, aPlantBasedDiet.org, is a Blue Zones recognized organization. We've gone through their procedures and things so that we are considered recognized. I guess that's the designation that they give, and it's good. It's a good thing because we really are focusing on longevity. And obviously, you can see that I'm definitely focusing on longevity with the release of this book. So I'm going to look at some notes here. If you remember the last chapter that just happened, the one before this, I talked about giving up the American dream. But the reality is most of the world still wants to be like Americans. And the general idea of the blue zones is somebody named Dan Buettner went around and studied the different areas of the world where they had the most centenarians, I think is how you say, 100 years or older people. And those were their 5 blue zones. He studied those areas, tried to determine what the habits of longevity were in those areas. But unfortunately, everyone wants to be like Americans. So you do not want to be like Americans. You want to learn what happened in those blue zones. Now, I'm not saying that the blue zones is the end all be all, because it definitely is not. Okay, that's the cut to the chase. Blue zones are cool. It's nice. Most of them don't exist anymore, even as mentioned in these concepts about longevity, because everyone still wants to be like Americans. That's why they don't exist anymore. They existed like for a generation or so, but now all the younger people just want to take on the American lifestyle. I don't even understand why, but that's just how it is. Health is always seems like at the lowest end of the priority for so many people out there. We need to teach this. We need to teach it when people are younger. This is why it's so low on the priority list. All right, so blue zones, what are they? They're areas where people live the longest. There are certain areas like Okinawa, Japan. They found that a lot of people ate sweet potatoes. There is an area in the United States, Loma Linda, California. That's because it's I'm sorry, I'm not remembering now. Having diabetes type 3, but it's basically a Christian religion that is more plant-based, and they are headquartered in Loma Linda. So that's it. The connection is plant-based. Like we said, Okinawa, we're talking about eating sweet potatoes as a staple in the diet. Then Loma Linda, they're eating mostly plant-based. And of course, there's other areas. There's like an area in Italy and a few other places. But the basic idea is that most of these places are plant-based. And of course, we talk about here in this book, eating mainly plants. And that's what you want to do. You want to focus your entire life around eating more food as grown. Now, why is blue zones outdated, and what are the other attributes of blue zones that I shouldn't pay attention to? Well, they have some really great things besides just a diet, like socialization, which I talked about earlier in the relationships chapter, like purposeful exercise. I talked about that earlier in the book. These are all different things that you will find that are in common in blue zones areas. One of the things they also mentioned you'll find in common in blue zones areas is the fact that people tend to drink red wine, I think. And we know that that's a group 1 carcinogen. I did a whole chapter on alcohol. Go back and watch that one. This is why I'm saying blue zones is not the end all be all. I don't even think they're going to be a thing going forward, at least not the way that they have been described in these 5 different places around the globe, because I think that those are already moving away from that. And I think that there are new areas that are kind of getting developing things that I think will be considered blue zones in the future. This is my prediction. Some of them we're involved with. If you go to aPlantBasedDiet.org and you look on our website under intentional communities, you'll see some communities in Ecuador where people are mostly raw, vegan, organic, fruitarian. I think that you may see a blue zone there in the future. I think, we work with Green Fair Organic Cafe. I mentioned them in some of the earlier chapters of the book, even before chapter 1, some of the introduction chapters. I think that folks associated with Green Fair in Herndon, Virginia, may also be a blue zone. So you got to kind of watch. Don't look back in the past except to learn. And we're learning about, like, I'm giving you the quick and dirty summary. You don't really need to know anything more about the blue zones, okay? If you found this video and you didn't know anything, you've already learned everything you need to know. Read the rest of this book, watch the rest of this book, because we're looking at more of the cutting edge stuff, where we are moving towards and the leading edge of what's going on. That's what you need to be more concerned with over time, especially if you intend to be around on this planet and alive for for longer. So don't look at things just because it's been done in the past. But this is another general, more of a psychological concept. What else I want to mention? So one of the things that I'm thinking about future blue zones areas, right? I'm just giving them that name because if you're in this chapter, you probably know what I'm talking about now. At least you do. Is that people are going to eat more local, and I also wonder about migration, because a lot of these blue zones things, they dealt with people in the past that really didn't migrate because transportation was much more difficult. Transportation was much more expensive. Now it's a lot easier. So if you need to eat local food as grown, of course, it would be great to migrate to different areas that have the foods that you want, or different foods that are in season during the right times of year, right? So that's another aspect to consider, not just necessarily one single place. Although, like I was mentioned before about Ecuador and the intentional communities were involved in there, the reason they picked that area is so they wouldn't have to migrate. So I still think it's something going forward, but I also think that the previous blue zones were in less than ideal areas for non-migration. I think that there have been some more thought put into these things in recent times, and that's why you got to kind of look at what's where we're moving towards, what's going forward. And of course, one of the things about growing your food as grown, as we talked about in this book, is the importance of using real organic soil, real good soil, good growing methods, and of course, actual sun. There's nothing more powerful than the sun. I have a chapter just on the sun about how powerful that is and how the plants can harness that. And then, of course, transmit all that information to us, to our bodies, in a way that can be used for our benefit. So that's basically all I've got in this chapter for the blue zones. And, if you have anything to add, or anything I may have missed, by all means, please put that in the comments. But like I said, I want to make this a quick summary because in the past, like I said, the blue zones were a thing at the time when they actually were those cultures that they have been talked about. And they were a thing when that book was written, and kind of identified those concepts or those habits of longevity that people did. But now in 2022, we need to kind of push that envelope, and we need to take everything we have along with the internet, because these blue zones areas, of course, developed pre-internet. They were already around pre-internet. They just kind of showed the results, because it takes time to see the results. So a lot of the things I'm talking about intentional communities, about Green Fair Organic Cafe in Northern Virginia, you're not going to see the results of the work that's being done with these new blue zone areas, for another generation or so. But I do believe you will see it, and then people will look back and go, "Oh, okay, yeah, why didn't I do that?" And then if you look at all other chapters I wrote here, well, that's because you basically had to be total counterculture and be totally different and do what everybody else wasn't doing at the same time. It's really easy to do stuff that everyone's doing. And actually, that's why in these blue zone areas that developed over generations, it was easy for most people to stay in line there because everyone was already doing it. That's another concept that is important to learn from those blue zones. And right now, the culture that we live in, if I take these specific areas and I break it down, and I say, well, the work that's being done in Ecuador at these intentional communities, well, yeah, you're in there. If you're in there, you don't go, you get that same benefit. But if you go to Green Fair in Northern Virginia, it's kind of different, because you get actually an even better, more health-focused, food-centered lifestyle at Green Fair, but you're in the general community, which, like as I've talked about so many times, I'd say that any store you go into, it has food. 80% of what's in there is really, really bad, and you never should have. So many temptations where you don't have the temptations to cheat. I have a chapter on cheat days, but think about this. You have to be so good at self-control to live in a community where most people are doing the wrong thing, and you want to do something different. And again, that kind of speaks to how and why the blue zones were able to be successful at what they were doing over generations. There was no outside communication. There was no internet. Everyone was doing the same thing. It was easy to just go right along with that. There wasn't really any other option. So again, that kind of also mentions how and why the intentional community concept, if done right, is going to be highly beneficial to your longevity and forming good habits. But like I said, Green Fair, the work of Green Fair is incredibly important. We support that. And anytime you're talking about feeding people health optimizing food, even though we know you can just walk next door and have the most health destroying food possible. Hopefully you will learn to, master your psychology and not have to fall into that trap. And I'm going to have chapters coming up on this too, lots of previous chapters, so make sure you share them. And again, please let me know your experience with blue zones, how you would describe, blue zones, and what any kind of other aspects that I didn't touch on that you may think are important if you know more about them. And of course, like the video if you got some value out of it, and subscribe so that you get notified about the next chapter. We'll see you in the next chapter. Bye-bye.